This is the story of a young Muslim girl who experienced something so extraordinary, it turned her world upside down. She died. For a few moments, her heart stopped, her body gave out, and the world around her faded into nothingness. But when she came back, she was not the same. She brought with her a message that left her family, her community, and even herself in utter shock. What could possibly happen in those moments beyond life that would make her question everything she had ever believed? And what did she see that led her to change her faith?
Aisha was a 15-year-old girl. She lived in a lively neighborhood with her close-knit family. Her life revolved around school, prayers, and the chaos of life with two younger siblings. Her home was a place where love was louder than any noise from the bustling streets outside. 5 times a day, the call to prayer echoed through the air, which reminded everyone of the kind of life they shared. Aisha loved the routine. It made her feel grounded, safe, and connected to something bigger than herself. Her family was everything to her. Her dad was a hardworking man who always made sure they had what they needed. Her mom was the heart of the family. She managed the house, cooked amazing meals, and made sure Aisha and her siblings always felt loved and cared for. Aisha was the oldest of 3. Her brother Hamza, who was 10, had endless energy. He was the type to climb anything he could find, even if it meant getting a scolding from their mom. Then there was Zainab, the youngest, at 7. She adored Aisha and followed her everywhere, always wanting to be part of whatever her big sister was doing. Aisha didn't mind, most of the time. Mornings in their house started early. Before the sun was even up, Aisha would wake to the sound of her mom quietly preparing for Fajr, the dawn prayer. Together, they would spread their prayer mats in the living room. The house would be completely silent, except for their soft whispers of prayer. It was Aisha's favorite time of day. There was something so peaceful about it, like the whole world had paused just for that moment after Fajr while the rest of the house was still asleep. Aisha liked to sit for a little while longer, thinking or praying on her own. Sometimes she would look out the window at the dark sky, waiting for the first hint of light. She felt close to God in those moments, like she could pour her heart out without needing words. At school, Aisha was known as the kind and smart one. Her teachers often praised her, and her friends loved how easy it was to talk to her. She was the type of person who made everyone feel included. But Aisha also had big dreams. She wanted to be a doctor one day. It was something she felt deeply about. Her dad often told her stories about a family friend who was a doctor and had saved so many lives. Aisha wanted to be that person, someone who could make a real difference. Science was her favorite subject. She loved learning how things worked, how the human body healed, and how small actions could save lives. Her teachers encouraged her, saying she had the focus and determination to achieve her dream. But her friends often teased her, saying she was too serious for her age. Aisha would just laugh and shrug it off. She didn't mind. She knew what she wanted, and she was not going to let anything distract her. At home, Aisha was a big help. She would often play referee between Hamza and Zainab when they argued or helped them with their homework. She was like a second mom to them, but she still found time to just be their fun older sister. Whether it was playing silly games with Zainab or telling Hamza stories to calm him down before bed, Aisha loved being there for them. Her mom relied on her a lot too. In the evenings, Aisha would help her prepare dinner or fold laundry while they talked about the day. Her mom would sometimes give her advice or remind her to stay focused on her faith and her studies. Aisha loved these moments. They made her feel closer to her mom, like she was learning how to carry on the same strength and love her mom showed every day. The mosque was like a second home for Aisha. She loved everything about it: the towering minaret, the peaceful courtyard, the sound of the imam's voice during prayers. She would go there often with her mom, joining women's gatherings where they shared stories, recited Quranic verses, and supported one another. These moments strengthened her faith and gave her a sense of community. But Aisha was not without her doubts. At night, when everyone else was asleep, she would sometimes sit by her bedroom window, looking up at the stars. The sky made her feel small in a way that was not scary, but made her wonder about life. She would think about the universe, the nature of God, and what it all meant. She would whisper prayers, asking for clarity and understanding. These moments did not make her question her faith. They made her want to understand it better. Her parents often reminded her that life was a test, and true believers would find their reward in the hereafter. Aisha believed this, but she could not shake the feeling that there was more to discover, something she had not found yet. For all her deep thoughts and big dreams, Aisha was still a teenager. She loved reading, especially stories about people from different cultures and faraway places. She enjoyed music, though she didn't play it too loud in case her dad disapproved. She had a close group of friends who kept her grounded, and she loved spending time with them, even if their conversations sometimes felt trivial compared to the questions swirling in her head. At the same time, Aisha felt a pull toward something bigger. She did not know what it was, but it was there. A quiet yearning for more. Her life was not perfect, of course. Like any teenager, Aisha sometimes felt the pressure of expectations. She wanted to honor her family's traditions while also exploring the world beyond her small neighborhood. She loved her culture and faith, but she was also curious about other beliefs and ways of life. It was not that she wanted to leave her roots behind. She just wanted to understand more. Her friends sometimes called her too serious because she spent so much time thinking about the future. They didn't always get why she cared so much about the big questions in life, but Aisha could not help it. That's just who she was. Little did Aisha know, her life was about to change in ways she could not imagine. She was standing on the edge of something extraordinary, something that would challenge everything she thought she knew. For now, though, she was just Aisha, helpful, thoughtful, and full of dreams, blissfully unaware of what was coming next. Aisha's day began like any other. The warm glow of the sun poured through the windows of her small home, spilling light onto the neatly arranged prayer mats and modest furniture. The house was alive with activity. Her siblings were already bickering about who had to help set the table, and her mother was busy in the kitchen preparing breakfast. Aisha rolled up her sleeves and joined her mother, folding dough into perfect rounds for paratha. Hamza, her 10-year-old brother, kept sneaking pieces of dough when he thought no one was looking, his mischievous grin giving him away every time. Zainab, just 7, was busy arranging the plates, though she seemed more interested in creating a design than actually setting the table. The house was chaotic at that time, but it was the kind of noise Aisha loved. It meant her family was together and their home was full of life. After breakfast, her father gave his usual silent encouragement with a gentle tap on her shoulder, reminding her to work hard and stay focused. Aisha smiled, taking it as a quiet nod of approval. School was her favorite part of the day, a place where she thrived and felt she could be herself. She excelled in her classes, especially science, and her teachers often praised her determination and curiosity. By the time she returned home in the evening, Aisha felt unusually tired. It was not the typical exhaustion from a long day of school and chores. It was heavier, as if her body were trying to tell her something. She brushed it off, attributing it to the day's work, but her mother noticed. She placed a hand on Aisha's forehead and frowned. "You look pale," her mother said softly. "Rest tonight. You have been pushing yourself too much." Aisha did not want to worry her mother, so she agreed, but inside she felt uneasy. Something was not right. By the next morning, the unease had turned into something much worse. Aisha woke with a pounding headache and a fever so high she could barely open her eyes. Her limbs felt like lead, and even breathing seemed like a struggle. Her mother's worry deepened, and her father wasted no time calling for a doctor. The doctor arrived later that day, his face serious as he examined her. He diagnosed Aisha with a severe infection and prescribed medication. He urged the family to monitor her closely. However, the medication did not seem to help. As the hours turned into days, Aisha grew weaker. Her body, once so full of energy and life, now felt like it was slipping away from her. Her family rallied around her. Her mother stayed by her side, cooling her forehead with a damp cloth and whispering prayers under her breath. Her father, usually so calm and composed, looked visibly shaken. His eyes were red from lack of sleep. Hamza and Zainab would tiptoe into her room because they were afraid. Aisha tried to reassure them with a weak smile, but even that took all the strength she had. One evening, as the family gathered around her bed, Aisha felt something change. Her breaths came slower, shallower until they were barely there. She could feel the tears of her mother soaking into the hand she held, her father's grip tightening as though he were trying to hold her here. But Aisha felt herself slipping away. And then, it happened. She felt weightless, as though her body no longer mattered. For a moment, she hovered above the bed and watched the scene below. She saw her mother sobbing, her father's face buried in his hands, and her siblings standing frozen in the doorway. It was surreal, seeing herself there, lifeless, while she floated just above them. But the scene did not last long. The room faded, and Aisha found herself enveloped in something entirely different. She was surrounded by light. It was warm, radiant, and alive. It was not like any light she had seen before. It was not harsh or glaring, but soft and welcoming, as if it were wrapping her in a comforting embrace. The light seemed to pulse gently, almost like it had its own rhythm, its own life. Aisha felt a peace she had never experienced before, a calm that made every worry, every fear melt away. As she looked around, she realized she was in a space unlike anything she had ever known. It stretched endlessly in every direction, yet it did not feel empty. The air itself seemed to hum with energy, and everything around her was alive in a way she could not explain. The colors were vibrant, but not in a way she could describe. They were not just colors. They felt like emotions, memories, and sensations all at once. The ground beneath her feet was not really ground, but she felt supported, as though she could walk if she wanted to. The space was filled with a soft glowing mist that swirled gently. It created patterns that seemed to shift and change as she watched. It was not cold or warm. It was just perfect. The feeling of balance and harmony filled her like everything in the world made sense in this place. Aisha felt light, free, and unburdened. She was not thinking about the infection that had racked her body or the worry on her family's faces. None of that seemed to matter here. All that mattered was the peace and the overwhelming sense of love that surrounded her. The air itself felt alive. It carried a subtle hum, a sound so faint it was almost imperceptible, but it vibrated deep within her. This noise was more like a feeling, a resonance that filled her entire being. Every part of her felt connected to this place, as though she had always belonged here, but had not realized it until now. Aisha's gaze shifted to the horizon, or what she thought was the horizon. There was not a clear line where the space ended, but there was a sense of direction, a pull towards something beyond what she could see. The colors around her grew more vivid as she moved, or was she being guided? She was not sure, but it did not matter. She felt no fear, only curiosity and a strange sense of anticipation. The space began to change subtly. The mist grew thinner. It started revealing shapes and forms that seemed to emerge from the light itself. She saw what looked like streams of shimmering gold flowing into the distance, their paths merging like rivers on a map. Above her, the sky, or what she thought was the sky, shifted and danced with hues of blue, gold, and violet, each color more beautiful than the last. As Aisha continued to take in the endless beauty around her, she felt something. It was not a sound or a sight, but a presence, a gentle yet powerful presence. It filled the space, wrapping around her like a warm breeze. She knew she was not alone, and for the first time since arriving, her heart began to race. There was something No, someone here with her. She could not see them yet, but she could feel them. The presence was so strong it made her feel both awestruck and comforted. Then she saw something just ahead, emerging from the light. Aisha felt the presence before she saw it. There was a warmth that wrapped around her, more profound than anything she had ever experienced. It was not just around her, it was inside her, filling her with a sense of love so deep it brought tears to her eyes. The light she had been walking through seemed to pulse gently, almost as if it were alive. The air itself carried a hum, a sound she could not hear, but could feel deep in her chest. Then came the voice. It was not loud, it was not harsh. It was soft yet commanding, gentle yet impossible to ignore. The voice echoed in the vastness around her, but it also seemed to speak directly into her heart. It called her name, Aisha, not like a stranger would call out, but like someone who had known her forever, who knew everything about her. She turned toward the voice, and that's when she saw the figure. Emerging from the light, it radiated love and compassion in a way she could not describe. It was not like looking at a person. It was more than that. The figure didn't need a face, yet Aisha felt she knew it. It was as if her soul recognized this presence, and the recognition overwhelmed her. Awe, comfort, and something deeper, a sense of belonging washed over her all at once. The figure spoke again. The words were sounds of truths that seemed to embed themselves into her very being. "You are loved beyond measure," the voice said, each word resonating within her. "The truth is not hidden. It is before you. Seek it, and you will find the life you were created for." Aisha wanted to speak, to ask questions, to understand what was happening, but no words came. Instead, she felt her heart flood with emotions. Joy, so profound, it felt like she might burst. Sorrow so deep, it brought tears streaming down her face. Confusion at what she was being shown, and yet clarity, as if she was finally seeing something she had always been meant to see. The light around her began to shift, and suddenly she was not standing in the vastness anymore. She was seeing things, like images, visions, moments. They came to her in flashes, quick yet vivid, like pieces of a puzzle she did not yet know how to put together. She saw a man. His eyes were kind, his hands outstretched as if inviting her closer. He was not just a figure in the vision. He felt alive, present. There was something in his gaze. There was love so profound, it felt like it could heal anything. Behind him, she saw a cross silhouetted against a brilliant sky. The sight of it sent waves of emotion crashing through her. Forgiveness, mercy, and an overwhelming sense of peace radiated from the scene. It felt like she was being offered something she didn't fully understand, but she knew it was important. The voice spoke again, its tone steady but filled with compassion. "Your path will not be easy, but you are never alone. I am with you." And just as suddenly as it began, the vision started to fade. The light grew softer, dimmer. The warmth began to recede, replaced by a growing awareness of the cold, heavy reality of her body. Aisha felt herself being pulled back, the vastness of the space slipping away. She didn't want to leave. She wanted to stay in the peace, the love, the light. But the pull was strong, undeniable. She gasped for air, her lungs burning as they filled with oxygen. Her eyes fluttered open, and the first thing she saw was her mother's tear-streaked face leaning over her. Her mother cried out in relief. Her voice was trembling as she called out to her husband. Her father rushed to her side and gripped her hand tightly. His tears were now tears of joy. Hamza and Zainab peeked around the doorway. Their eyes were wide with disbelief and hope. Aisha felt too weak to speak, her body still recovering from the ordeal. She closed her eyes again, trying to process what had just happened. The warmth of the light was gone, but the voice still echoed in her mind. The man with the kind eyes and outstretched hands, the cross, the words, they were all so clear, so real. Over the next few days, Aisha's recovery was nothing short of miraculous. The fever that had racked her body disappeared, and her strength began to return. Her family called it a blessing, their prayers answered. They believed Allah had brought her back, and they were determined to show their gratitude through even more devotion. But Aisha could not shake what she had seen. While her parents and siblings celebrated her recovery, she was left grappling with the enormity of what had happened. The love she had felt, the words she had heard, the figure she had seen. It was all so clear, so undeniable. And yet, it did not align with anything she had been taught. At first, Aisha said nothing. She did not know how to explain it. She feared her family would not understand, that they might think she was mistaken or confused. How could she describe the light, the presence, the cross? How could she explain the voice that had spoken to her so clearly, urging her to seek the truth? She tried to go back to her routine, but everything felt different now. Prayers, which had always brought her comfort, now left her unsettled. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the vision, to the figure and the words. School felt distant, her usual focus replaced by a constant nagging thought of what had been shown to her and what was the reason behind it. One evening, unable to keep her thoughts to herself any longer, Aisha quietly borrowed her father's phone. She locked herself in her room and began searching for answers. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard before typing the first thing that came to her mind: man with outstretched hands and cross. The results startled her. Page after page mentioned Jesus Christ, the cross, and Christianity. Aisha's heart raced as she clicked on the link. She read about his life, his teachings, and his sacrifice. The descriptions matched what she had seen: the kind eyes, the outstretched hands, the sense of overwhelming love and forgiveness. The more she read, the more she felt like pieces of a puzzle were falling into place. She stayed up for hours, reading story after story. She kept learning about concepts she had never encountered before: grace, redemption, unconditional love. The idea that God's love was freely given, not earned through deeds alone, fascinated her. It was so different from what she had grown up believing, yet it resonated deeply with the words spoken to her during the vision. But along with the excitement came fear. What did this mean for her faith? For her family? She had always been taught that Islam was the ultimate truth, and that there was no need to look elsewhere for answers. Exploring another religion felt like a betrayal, not just to her family, but to herself. And yet, she could not ignore the pull she felt, the sense that she was being guided towards something she didn't fully understand. That night, Aisha lay awake and kept staring at the ceiling. The vision played over and over in her mind: the light, the figure, the cross, the voice. The love she had felt was undeniable, but so was the confusion. She whispered silent prayers, asking for guidance, for clarity, for anything that could help her make sense of what she was feeling. But the answers did not come easily. Instead, there was a quiet stirring in her heart, a persistent sense that the truth was still unfolding, and she was not meant to turn away from it. The days that followed were so heavy and difficult for her. On the outside, Aisha tried to appear normal. She helped her siblings with their homework, joined her mother for prayers, and attended school like nothing had changed. But inside, she felt like a stranger in her own life. The vision had changed her, and she knew she could not go back to the way things were. The truth she had been shown was not just a memory, it was a call to something more. But what that more was, Aisha didn't yet know. She only knew that her journey was just beginning. Aisha grew quieter with each passing day. She had a secret she could no longer ignore: the light she had seen, the figures she had encountered, and the words that had echoed in her soul. Everything about her vision stayed with her, refusing to fade. She carried it like an invisible weight, pressing down on her chest with every passing day. While her family carried on with their lives, she felt stuck between two worlds. The life she had always known, the truth she was beginning to uncover. Her family was the first to notice that something was different about her. Her mother, ever attentive, watched Aisha with growing concern. There was a quietness about her that had not been there before. She seemed distant, retreating into herself in ways her mother could not quite understand. Aisha would smile when spoken to, but the smile never reached her eyes. She would help with chores, but her hands moved mechanically, like her mind was somewhere far away. Her father, though less prone to noticing emotional shifts, was concerned in his own way. He saw her slipping grades and heard the half-hearted responses when he asked about school. Aisha, who used to light up at the mention of her science projects, now shrugged and said everything was fine. Her father was not the kind to press, but his silence only added to the tension Aisha felt. At school, things were not much better. Aisha had always been the dependable one, the student teachers could count on, and the friend everyone could rely on for advice. Now she found herself zoning out during lessons, unable to focus on the words being spoken. Her textbook sat unopened on her desk, her pen idle in her hand. The thoughts in her mind were louder than anything happening around her. Her best friend Zara was the first to confront her. Zara was sharp and observant, with a way of cutting through the noise and getting straight to the point. During lunch one day, she pulled Aisha aside and asked what was going on. Judging from Zara's voice, it was clear that she was concerned. She scanned Aisha's face with her eyes for any sign of an answer. Aisha wanted to tell her everything, the vision, the figure, the questions that now consumed her, but fear held her back. What would Zara think? Would she understand? Or would she see Aisha as someone who was straying too far from what they both believed? Instead of opening up, Aisha deflected. She said she was just tired, and that school and home were overwhelming her a little. Zara did not look convinced, but she let it go, saying she was there if Aisha ever wanted to talk. The guilt of hiding the truth from her closest friend weighed heavily on Aisha, but she reminded herself that this was a journey she had to take alone. The vision had changed everything. Aisha could not stop thinking about the figure in the light, the voice that had spoken her name, and the man she had seen with outstretched hands. Every detail replayed in her mind, clearer than any dream she had ever had. The love and peace she had felt in that moment were unlike anything she had ever known, and the words spoken to her about seeking truth and being loved beyond measure stayed with her like a persistent echo. In the stillness of the night, when her family was asleep, Aisha would sit by the faint glow of her bedside lamp. Her father's phone, which she borrowed under the guise of checking her school schedule, became her portal to a world she had never explored before. With hesitant fingers, she typed her questions into the search bar. The results were overwhelming. Every search led her to pages about stories of people who had experienced similar visions. First, she read about Jesus' teachings, about grace and forgiveness, and about the idea of unconditional love. The more she read, the more she felt a strange sense of familiarity, as though she were rediscovering something she had always known deep down. She learned about the cross and its significance, about sacrifice and redemption, and every word seemed to resonate with the message she had heard during her vision. Then, she read about the stories. She realized that she was not the only one who had had this peculiar vision. Many other people had the same odd encounter. Her inner conflict grew with each passing day. Aisha began to withdraw from the people around her, not because she wanted to, but because she didn't know how to bridge the gap between her old life and the new truths she was discovering. Her mother's concerned glances became more frequent. Her siblings, who once found comfort in her presence, now seemed unsure of how to approach her. Even her teachers at school noticed the change. They would pull her aside to ask if everything was okay. One evening, her mother approached her while they were folding laundry together. It was a quiet moment, the kind that usually made Aisha feel close to her mother. But this time, the silence felt heavy. Her mother asked if she was feeling better and if there was anything on her mind. Aisha wanted to tell her everything, to spill all the confusion and questions that had been building up inside her. But the fear of disappointing her mother, of seeing her warm eyes turn cold with judgment, stopped her. Instead, Aisha asked a question that had been weighing on her. She asked what their family believed about other religions, about Christians specifically. Her mother was surprised by the question. But then she answered thoughtfully. She said that every religion had good in it, but that Islam was the complete truth. Her words were a reminder of the faith that had always guided their family. Aisha nodded and ended the conversation there, but the answer left her feeling even more conflicted. The tension inside her was like a storm that refused to pass. Every quiet moment became an opportunity for reflection, for wrestling with the thoughts she could not escape. Late at night, she prayed, asking for clarity and guidance. She prayed to the same divine presence she had felt during her vision, hoping for some kind of sign to show her what to do. But the answers did not come easily. Instead, there was a quiet stirring in her heart, a sense that this journey was hers to navigate. As the days turned into weeks, Aisha found herself living a double life. To her family and friends, she was the same Aisha they had always known. She was dutiful, kind, and focused on her studies. But in the solitude of her room, she was a seeker, searching for answers to questions she could barely articulate. Each step brought her closer to a truth she was terrified to uncover. Her moments of discovery were filled with both wonder and doubt. One night, while reading testimonies from people who had embraced Christianity after similar experiences, she felt a deep connection to their stories. They spoke of love and grace, of finding peace in a way they had never known before. Their words mirrored the feelings Aisha had experienced during her vision, and for the first time, she felt a sense of belonging in their stories. But the fear never left her. Aisha could not ignore the consequences of her curiosity. Her community was not just a place where she lived, it was a part of who she was. To question her faith was to question her identity, her family, and her place in the world. The thought of disappointing her parents, of being seen as a stranger in her own home, made her hesitate at every step. The more she learned, the more isolated she felt. She could not share her thoughts with anyone, not her family, not her friends, not even Zara, who had always been her confidant. The weight of her secret grew heavier, and the walls around her seemed to close in. Yet despite the fear and uncertainty, Aisha felt a quiet strength building within her. She did not know where this journey would lead, but she knew she could not turn back. The vision had awakened something in her, a longing for truth that could not be ignored. Each night, as she stared at the faint glow of her lamp, she reminded herself that the journey was just beginning, and she had the courage to see it through. Aisha's mind raced as she sat quietly in the corner of her family's living room, her hands nervously twisting the edge of her scarf. The laughter of her siblings and the comforting chatter of her parents filled the room, but Aisha felt like she was watching it all through a fog. It was all so familiar, yet she felt like a stranger in her own home. This moment was coming, the one she had been dreading, but knew was inevitable. She could not hold it in any longer. A few weeks earlier, during one of her late-night searches, Aisha found a video that would change everything. She had been spending hours secretly browsing for answers about her vision, trying to piece together the overwhelming feelings and images that had taken hold of her. That night, she found a video of a Christian pastor recounting his experience of meeting Jesus. In a dream, the pastor described how he had felt an unshakable love that changed his life completely. He talked about forgiveness, peace, and a kind of joy that went beyond words. As Aisha listened, her chest tightened, and tears streamed down her face. It was as if the pastor were describing the exact presence she had encountered in her own vision. When the video ended, Aisha sat frozen, clutching the phone tightly in her hands. Her heart ached, but it was not just confusion or fear this time. There was a longing, a deep yearning for the kind of clarity and peace the pastor seemed to have found. For the first time, Aisha felt like someone else might understand what she was going through. The video stayed with her for days. She could not shake the feeling that it was meant for her, that she had stumbled upon it for a reason. That same week, she made a bold decision. She found an online Bible and began reading it in secret. It felt strange at first. This was something entirely new, something she had always thought was not for her. Aisha started with the New Testament. The words she read felt different from anything she had ever encountered before. They were simple, but carried a depth that spoke to her heart in ways she could not explain. The teachings about love, forgiveness, and caring for others felt personal, as if they were written just for her. She read the parables and the stories of Jesus, captivated by how he reached out to the broken, the lost, and the outcasts. The feeling behind those words drew her in. It felt alive, like the words were speaking directly to her soul. Aisha would stay up late at night, her room dimly lit, scrolling through passage after passage, her heart both heavy and light at the same time. But with every moment of peace came an equally heavy sense of guilt. Aisha's upbringing had taught her that her faith was complete and that there was no need to look elsewhere for answers. Yet, here she was, drawn to something that felt so different, yet so real. The struggle inside her grew stronger with every passing day. One evening, her father asked her to lead the family in prayer before dinner. Aisha hesitated, her heart pounding as she clasped her hands together. She recited the prayer as she always had, but this time, the words felt hollow. They left her lips, but they didn't reach her heart. As the family began eating, Aisha kept her head down, hoping no one would notice the tears forming in her eyes. That night, she broke down in her room. She sobbed into her pillow. She was overwhelmed by the weight of everything she was carrying. It felt like her heart was being pulled in two opposite directions, and she didn't know how much longer she could take it. In the darkness, she whispered a desperate prayer. She didn't even know who she was praying to anymore. All she knew was that she needed help. She asked for guidance, for clarity, for something, anything, that would show her what to do. The days that followed were filled with anxiety. Aisha knew she could not keep this secret forever. Each day felt like it brought her closer to a breaking point, like the truth was bubbling up inside her and would spill over at any moment. She could not focus on school, could not fully engage with her family, and even Zara, her best friend, had started asking questions about what was wrong. Aisha tried to hide it, but Zara was not easily fooled. One day, during lunch at school, Zara pulled her aside and asked if something was going on. Aisha wanted so badly to tell her everything, to pour out all the emotions and confusion that had been building up for weeks. But fear stopped her. What would Zara think? Would she judge her? Would she tell others? The thought of being misunderstood was too much. Aisha forced a smile and brushed off Zara's concerns, saying she was just tired from school and family responsibilities. But inside, she felt more alone than ever. One morning, Aisha woke up feeling strangely calm. It was a quiet kind of calm, like the eye of a storm. For weeks, her heart had been in turmoil, torn between her love for her family and the undeniable pull of the vision she had experienced. But today, something had shifted. She could not explain it, but she knew what she had to do. That day, Aisha spent hours in quiet reflection. She reread passages from the Bible she had downloaded, clinging to the words like a lifeline. One verse stood out to her more than any other. "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Those words felt like they were written just for her. They gave her the courage to face what she had been avoiding for so long. That evening, as her family gathered in the living room after dinner, Aisha's heart raced. Her parents were chatting softly, her siblings were playing a game on the floor, and the room was filled with the warmth of familiarity. But Aisha felt like she was on the outside looking in. Aisha mustered up the courage and brought her family's attention to herself. She told them that she wanted to tell them something. In fact, she told them she wanted to confess something that she had been hiding for all this time. It was starting to eat her alive, and now she wanted to let it out in the open. At first, her parents thought it was something about her school. It had to be. Aisha was their innocent and obedient daughter. The problem she might be having should be related to school, and school only. So they asked her if something was wrong in her class. To her horror, Aisha told them that it had nothing to do with her school. It was something else entirely. The air in the room was thick with tension, as if everyone had forgotten to breathe. Aisha's siblings, sensing something serious was happening, sat quietly, their earlier laughter and chatter fading away. Her mother leaned forward, her face pale with worry, and her father's brows furrowed deeply, a mix of curiosity and unease written across his face. Aisha's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel her hands trembling as she clasped them tightly in her lap. This was not just a conversation. It was a moment that could change everything. She swallowed hard, her voice shaky as she finally spoke. "You know how I was sick, and we thought I might not make it." Her words hung in the air, her voice faltering under the weight of the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Her mother's hand flew to her heart, a silent gesture of fear and concern. "What is it, daughter? You can tell us," her mother urged. Aisha took a deep breath and said, "Something happened to me during that time. I had a vision." Her father shifted in his seat, his expression sharpened at this comment. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in a mix of caution and disbelief. He asked her, "What kind of vision?" Judging from her tone, it seemed like he was careful not to jump to conclusions. Aisha hesitated. How could she possibly explain something so deeply personal and profound? She struggled to find the words, but they came haltingly. "I was in this place. It was filled with light. It was not just light, though. It was warm, alive. I felt peace, more peace than I have ever felt in my life." Her voice cracked as the memory of that moment came rushing back, and she blinked rapidly to keep the tears at bay. And there was someone there, a presence, a figure. Her mother's eyes widened, and her siblings leaned in slightly. Her mother asked, "Who was it?" By this point, her mother's voice was barely above a whisper. Aisha swallowed hard, her mouth was dry. She admitted that at first, she didn't know. But then she said that they spoke to her. They gave her a message. They told her she was loved more than she could ever imagine. They said the truth was in front of Aisha and that she needed to seek it. Her father's frown deepened, and his jaw tightened as if bracing himself for what was coming next. Aisha could feel his skepticism, his discomfort, but she pressed on. "I saw things, images, a man with outstretched hands, a cross against the sky. I didn't understand it then, but later I realized it was Jesus." Her words seemed to echo in the room. Everyone was clearly stunned. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. Her father's expression hardened, and her mother's lips trembled as tears began to fill her eyes. Aisha's siblings exchanged uneasy glances. Their young faces were etched with confusion and fear. This was not the Aisha they knew, their strong, dependable sister, who had always been a pillar in their family. Her father broke the silence first. His voice was low, almost too quiet, but it carried the weight of his emotions. He said, "Are you saying you believe in Christianity now?" Aisha's chest tightened as she struggled to respond. She knew this was the question she had been dreading most. She said, "I am not saying I have abandoned everything, Father, but I cannot deny what I have experienced. I have been reading, learning, and trying to understand. and it feels true. It feels like something I cannot ignore." Her father stood abruptly. His movements were sharp and controlled, but his face betrayed the storm of emotions inside him. And then he spoke. His voice was louder now, filled with a mix of hurt and anger. He said, "You have been reading the Bible, learning about Christianity behind our backs. Aisha, we raised you better than this. We raised you to know the truth." Her mother was crying openly now. She was shaking her head as if trying to wake herself from a bad dream. Her voice broke with anguish. She said, "How could you, Aisha? How could you question your faith like this, after everything we have taught you?" Then she covered her face with her hands and started sobbing. Aisha could not stop the tears streaming down her own face. She said, "I am not trying to hurt you. I love you, and I love everything you have given me. But I cannot ignore what I have experienced. It was real, Mother. It was real." Her younger brother finally broke his silence. His small voice cut through the tension in the room. He asked, "Does this mean you are not Muslim anymore?" This simple and innocent question hit Aisha like a blow. She looked at him. At this point, her heart ached at the fear and confusion in his eyes. She answered him with pure honesty. "I don't know. I'm still figuring it out. But what I do know is that I found something beautiful, and I cannot walk away from it." Her father's face softened slightly, though the pain in his eyes remained. He said, "Faith is not something you just pick and choose, Aisha. It is who you are. It is your heritage, your family. How can you even think of turning your back on everything we have built our lives around?" To this, Aisha replied, "I am not turning my back on you. I am just following what I believe is true. I need to do this. I need to know who I am and what I believe." The conversation stretched late into the night. Voices were raised, emotions ran high, and the pain in the room was almost tangible. Aisha's parents were heartbroken, her siblings confused, and Aisha herself felt emotionally drained. But despite the tension and the tears, she also felt a strange sense of peace. She had spoken her truth, something she had carried alone for far too long. The days that followed were anything but easy. Life in Aisha's home became tense, the air filled with unspoken words and lingering tension. Her parents avoided the topic as if hoping it would all go away on its own. Her mother busied herself with chores. She did not have that quiet demeanor anymore, nor her usual warmth. Her father became more reserved. He spoke to Aisha only when necessary and kept his sentences short and clipped. Aisha's siblings did not fully understand what had happened, but they felt the shift in the family dynamic. Her younger brother and sister, who had always been so close to her, now seemed hesitant to approach her. They were unsure of what to say or how to act. Aisha tried to go about her daily routine, but everything felt different. Prayers, once a source of comfort and connection, now felt heavy and conflicted. School, where she could usually escape into her studies, became another place where her mind wandered endlessly. Even her time with Zara felt strained, the weight of her secret creating a distance she did not know how to bridge. But Aisha's quiet journey of faith did not stop. Late at night, when the house was still, she continued to read the Bible in secret. The words brought her peace, even as the tension around her grew. She clung to the teachings of Jesus, finding strength in his message of love, forgiveness, and hope. Each time she read, she felt a little more clarity, a little more certainty that this was the path she was meant to walk. But with that clarity came the pain of knowing what it might cost her. She loved her family deeply, and the thought of hurting them was almost unbearable. But she could not ignore what she believed to be true. One night, as Aisha sat in her room with her Bible open, she felt a strange mix of sadness and determination. She did not know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. Her journey was not over. This was just the beginning, and no matter how difficult the road ahead might be, She was ready to face it. Aisha's life took on a new rhythm after that night of confession. The house was quieter in the weeks that followed, the kind of quiet that comes when people are unsure how to speak to one another. But for Aisha, the silence was not peaceful. It was loaded. She could feel the weight of unspoken questions and lingering tension in every interaction with her family. Yet, through it all, Aisha remained steadfast. She began to pray in her own way. She blended the prayers she had grown up with and the new ones she had learned from the Bible. In the mornings, she still woke early for Fajr with her mother, standing beside her in the familiar quiet of their living room. But when she prayed alone, her words became more personal. She found herself talking to God the way she imagined a child would speak to a parent, open, unfiltered, and full of questions. The Psalms, which she discovered while reading the Bible, became a lifeline. On days when she felt overwhelmed, she would repeat verses to herself, letting their words soothe her anxious heart. Her favorite was, "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want." It brought her comfort in a way she could not quite explain, as if the words themselves were holding her hand. Despite the tension, Aisha tried her best to show her family that her journey had not changed her love for them. She still helped her mother in the kitchen, rolling dough for parathas and chatting about mundane things. She still played games with her younger siblings, laughing as they teased each other. She still sat with her father in the evenings, listening as he told stories about their ancestors and the values they had upheld. But no matter how much she tried to keep things the same, Aisha knew that her family saw her differently now. There were moments when her father's eyes would linger on her a little too long, as if searching for something he no longer recognized. Her mother, who had always been quick to offer advice or comfort, now seemed hesitant. Maybe she was unsure of how to bridge the growing gap between them. As Aisha approached her 18th birthday, the tension in the house reached a breaking point. Her father, who had largely stayed quiet since that fateful night, finally sat her down for a conversation. He told her, gently but firmly, that while he loved her, he did not understand the choices she was making. He worried about how their extended family and community might react if they found out about her spiritual journey. He wanted her to reconsider, to think about the life she was stepping into and the life she was leaving behind. Aisha listened carefully. Her heart was aching for the pain in her father's voice. She assured him, as she had many times before, that her journey was not a rejection of her family or their love. But she also knew that staying in her childhood home, under the weight of their expectations and unspoken disapproval, was holding her back. Shortly after her 18th birthday, Aisha made the difficult decision to move out. It was not an easy choice. Leaving the safety of her family's home was terrifying, but she knew it was necessary. She found a small room to rent near her college, close enough to visit her family regularly, but far enough to give herself the space she needed to grow. Her mother cried when she packed her bags, folding Aisha's clothes with trembling hands and placing them neatly into the suitcase. Her siblings clung to her, begging her not to leave. Even her father, who had remained stoic throughout the process, looked away when it was time to say goodbye. His voice cracked as he wished her well. Living on her own for the first time was both exhilarating and overwhelming. Aisha threw herself into her studies because she was determined to make the most of the opportunity she had been given. She joined clubs and met people from all walks of life, each with their own beliefs and experiences. For the first time, Aisha felt free to explore the world without fear of judgment. She started attending a small church near her apartment because she was drawn by the warmth and kindness of the congregation. The services were simple but heartfelt, and Aisha found herself moved by the way people spoke openly about their struggles and their faith. It was different from anything she had experienced growing up, but it felt right. At the same time, Aisha made a point to stay connected with her family. She called her mother every evening. She would ask about her day and share stories about her own. She visited on weekends, helping her siblings with their homework and catching up on family news. Slowly, Her parents began to see that her transformation was not a rejection of them, but a deepening of her own spiritual path. Aisha's days were filled with discovery. She spent hours reading not just the Bible, but also books about theology, philosophy, and history. She wanted to understand how her two worlds, her past and her present, could coexist. She prayed often, her conversations with God becoming a source of strength and clarity. She also began volunteering at a local community center, helping to tutor children from immigrant families. It reminded her of the times she had helped her siblings with their studies, and it filled her with a sense of purpose. The children, with their boundless energy and curiosity, often asked her about her own life. She would smile and tell them that she was still figuring things out, but that she believed everyone's journey was important, no matter where it started. Over time, Aisha found a balance. She learned to navigate the challenges of her new life while honoring the parts of her past that had shaped her. She still celebrated Eid with her family and joined them for prayers and feasts, even as she celebrated Christmas with her new friends. She still wore her hijab because this was a symbol of her connection to her roots. But she also embraced the freedom to express herself in new ways. Her family, though still adjusting, began to see the strength and peace that Aisha had found in her journey. Her father, once so critical of her choices, started to ask her questions, not in anger, but out of curiosity. Her mother, who had worried that Aisha was lost to them, began to notice the small ways Aisha still carried their family's values with her. By the time Aisha graduated from college, she had built a life that was uniquely her own. She worked hard, balancing her job and her continued studies, and she stayed close to the people who mattered most to her. Her relationship with her family, while not without its struggles, had grown stronger with time. They did not always agree, but they had learned to love each other through their differences. Aisha's story became a quiet source of inspiration to those around her. Her courage to seek and live her truth resonated with friends, co-workers, and even strangers she met along the way. She often found herself listening to others who were struggling with their own questions, offering them the same compassion and understanding she had longed for during her darkest moments. Looking back, Aisha knew that the journey had not been easy. There had been moments of doubt, fear, and loneliness. But there had also been moments of profound peace, joy, and connection. She had learned that faith was not about choosing one path over another. It was about finding the courage to walk the path that was right for her. By this time, Aisha had realized that life is a journey filled with questions. From the moment we are old enough to think critically, we start asking, why are we here? What's the meaning of life? What's right? What's true? These questions don't just disappear as we grow older. In fact, they often deepen. The human mind is wired for curiosity, constantly searching for answers, seeking to understand the world and our place in it. But too often, we settle for what is easy, what we have been told, what is comfortable, what fits into the norms of our society. We quiet our questions because asking them can feel risky. Yet isn't it more dangerous to live a life where those questions go unanswered? Throughout history, the greatest thinkers, scientists, philosophers, and spiritual leaders have all shared one thing in common. They refused to stop searching. They were driven by the idea that no matter how much they knew, there was always more to discover. Galileo challenged centuries of beliefs about the cosmos because he dared to ask, what if we are wrong? Socrates famously said, an unexamined life is not worth living. These figures were not content with surface-level answers. They dug deeper, and in doing so, they changed the world. Aisha's story is a reminder of this same principle. She could have ignored her vision and dismissed it as a strange dream or a moment of weakness. She could have stayed silent, choosing to conform to the life she had always known. But something inside her refused to settle. That hunger for truth, that need to understand, would not let her rest. And it is that same hunger that exists in all of us. waiting to be embraced. The world is overflowing with knowledge, yet so many people go through life without ever truly seeking it. Why? Because asking questions is hard. It challenges the status quo, forces us to confront uncomfortable truths, and sometimes isolates us from the people around us. But think about it. Everything worth knowing, everything worth building, comes from stepping outside the comfort zone. Psychologists have long studied the human tendency to conform. From childhood, we are taught to fit in, to follow the rules, and to accept what we are told without question. This is not inherently bad. It is how societies function. But when conformity stifles curiosity, it becomes a prison. Imagine if every person who ever questioned the norm had chosen to stay silent. We would still be living in caves, afraid of fire. It is natural to fear the unknown. The human brain is wired to seek patterns, to find safety in familiarity. But that same brain is also wired for discovery. Curiosity is actually a survival mechanism. It is what drives us to innovate, to grow, to make sense of the chaos around us. When we stop questioning, we stop growing. And when we stop growing, we stop truly living. Aisha's journey was not just about faith. It was about the courage to question and the determination to find answers. It was not easy for her to confront the norms she grew up with. It was not easy to step away from the familiar and explore something completely different. But she did it because the questions inside her could not be ignored. And that's the essence of what it means to be human. To ask, to seek, to never settle. The world we live in today offers unprecedented access to knowledge. Think about it. Just a few decades ago, if you wanted to learn about something outside your immediate experience, you had to rely on books, teachers, or the rare chance to meet someone with the answers you sought. Now, with a few clicks, we can access libraries of information, connect with people from all walks of life, and explore perspectives we never knew existed. But having access is not enough. You have to be willing to use it. You have to want to know. The truth does not come knocking at your door. You have to go out and find it. And when you do, you have to be ready for the fact that it might challenge everything you thought you knew. In psychology, there's a concept called cognitive dissonance. It is the discomfort we feel when we are faced with information that contradicts our beliefs or values. Most people try to avoid this discomfort by rejecting the new information, even if it is true. It is easier to stick with what we know than to face the possibility that we might have been wrong. But growth only happens when we embrace that discomfort, when we let it push us towards something greater. Aisha could have ignored the dissonance she felt after her vision. She could have clung to what was safe and familiar, pretending she had not experienced what she did. But she didn't. She leaned into the discomfort, letting it guide her toward answers. That's what makes her journey so powerful. Her story is a story of courage and resilience. We live in a world filled with norms, traditions, and expectations. They are not inherently bad. They give us structure, identity, and a sense of belonging. But when those norms prevent us from asking questions, they become chains. People stay in places, relationships, or belief systems that no longer serve them, simply because it is easier than facing the unknown. The truth is, there is no one-size-fits-all answer to life's big questions. What works for one person might not work for another, and that's okay. What matters is that you are willing to ask, to seek, and to learn. Aisha's journey did not lead her to a perfect, tidy resolution. It led her to a path filled with challenges, but also with growth and meaning. That's what seeking the truth looks like. It is messy. It is complicated, but it is worth it. If there is one thing Aisha's story teaches us, it is that you don't have to have all the answers right away. The important thing is to keep searching. There's no shame in questioning what you have been taught or exploring new ideas. In fact, it is one of the most human things you can do. Life is not about blindly following a script. It is about writing your own. Think about the world we live in. Every culture, every religion, every philosophy offers a piece of the puzzle. The more we learn, the more we realize how interconnected we all are. Knowledge is a vast, limitless ocean, waiting for anyone brave enough to dive in. So, why limit yourself to a single drop when the entire ocean is available? Aisha's journey showed us that we have to embrace the questions. Her journey was about recognizing that growth doesn't happen in comfort zones. It happens when you step out, when you let yourself be vulnerable, when you open yourself to new possibilities. It is not easy, but nothing worthwhile ever is. If you are someone who has questions about faith, about life, about anything, don't ignore them. Don't let fear or doubt hold you back. This world is full of knowledge, wisdom, and experiences waiting to be explored. You don't have to accept everything you find, but you owe it to yourself to look. In the end, the journey of seeking is what makes life meaningful. Whether you are exploring the mysteries of the universe, the depths of your own soul, or the stories of others, you are part of something bigger than yourself. And that's a beautiful thing. So keep asking, keep seeking, and never stop growing. Now tell us, what other lesson did you learn from Aisha's story? Share with us in the comments below. Before you go, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring, life-changing stories like this one. Until then,